Good evening and welcome to the special meeting, a very special meeting, of the Board of Education for March 13th, 2023. And Mrs. Bonifield, would you take the roll, please?
Mrs. Acosta.
Here.
Mrs. Bradford.
Here.
Mrs. Burton.
Here.
Mrs. Frank.
Here.
Mrs. Jarvis.
Here.
Mrs. Bonifield is here. President Johnson.
Here. We do have a quorum. We'll move to item 2, audience communication. I don't see any blue slips. I don't see anybody filling them out, so we move to item 3, the ceremonial oath of office for appointed board member. And at this time, I would invite our city treasurer, Linda Shield, to come up. And Mrs. Frank, if you would join her.
Crystal, turn the...
And you can bring it closer to you.
Just quick tap. Quick tap. Here, should I do both of us? Come on, we're good. Okay, if you'd raise your right hand. I state your name.
I, Crystal Frank,
Do affirm that I will support the Constitution of the United States
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of this state,
and the Constitution of this state,
and that I will faithfully discharge
and I will faithfully discharge
the duties of the office of member of the Board of Education
of member of the Board of Education
of the Livonia Public Schools School District,
of the Livonia Public Schools School District,
Wayne County, Michigan,
Wayne County, Michigan,
according to the best of my ability, so help me God.
according to the best of my ability. So help me God.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
I want to thank Mrs. Shield for being here tonight. I know you have a very busy schedule. We appreciate it greatly. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any comments from the board at this time? Mrs. Burton?
I just could not let this go by without, if we're offering an opportunity for comments, I'm going to jump on that. We are very, very fortunate to have so many people in this community who were willing to serve on this, in this appointment. We have one individual, as I spoke of last week, who is very uniquely qualified. Crystal Frank is the only individual in this community that has this recent 4 years of experience on this specific Board of Education. We are very, very fortunate. We are very, very blessed to have you sitting back at this table with us.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Mrs. Bradford?
Welcome back.
Thank
It's
you.
good to have you here.
Thank you.
And I look forward to working with all our colleagues in the next few months and to get our work done. And it is a blessing to have you back, so thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments?
No, I'm happy.
I want to thank your family for allowing us to have you once again on Monday nights. So you have to get rid of that euchre tournament that you were playing in. And I know your family is here. Thank you for your support. We appreciate it. And with that, I think we'll get on to business. And if there's nothing else, then item 4 is adjournment. And we will be back shortly with our committee of the whole meeting. Thank you. Good evening and welcome to the Committee of the Whole meeting for March 13th, 2023 of the Livonia Public Schools Board of Education. For any of you in the audience who want to follow along with our agenda, if you go out the left-hand door and turn to the right, we have both agendas and blue slips for anyone who wants to address the board this evening. If you're watching from home, you can follow along with our agenda by going to our website, which is livoniapublicschools.org, and highlight over the board tab. And if you drop down, you'll be able to find our agendas. As I said, this is a committee of the whole meeting. For those in the community that perhaps this is your first time watching, this is the meeting where you will hear more discussion on the items that will come to the board eventually for a vote. We get into the nitty-gritty. You will not hear as much discussion at our regular meetings as you will here. This is probably the second time that an item has come before the board. They generally start with our study sessions, which we had a week ago. So this is the meeting that you want to tune into. One of the things that we always stress here is our community with character. And one of the characteristics that we find is extremely important is our respect. And you will see that amongst the board and the cabinet. We respect each other's opinions regardless of whether or not we agree with them. And frequently we do have differences in our beliefs on any items that come before the board, but we always respect each other and listen to each other and do so with an open mind. And we simply request that anyone who comes before the board, you apply that same respect that we do. It's probably the best way that we can teach our children how to be good citizens. With that, and before we start our meeting, I do want to recognize the passing of a longtime LPS employee, very, very dedicated employee, Mr. James Herod, over the weekend. It was really a shock to those of us who knew him. I just saw him a week ago, so it is really a blow to LPS. We never like to lose employees. I do have some information on anyone who wants to, let me just pull it up here. His funeral arrangements, the visitation will be Friday from 2 to 8 p.m. at the L.J. Griffin Funeral Home in Northville. You can find the address. I just wanted to take a moment to recognize Mr. Herod and thank him for his years of service and send out our sympathies to his family. With that, we'll move on to item 1, audience communication. I do not see any blue slips, and I don't see anyone in the audience racing to write them out, so we'll move on to item 2, our committee of the whole. And we have one item for discussion tonight. We did discuss this at the study session. We do like to go over our code of ethics once a year. Unfortunately, with the pandemic, we got a little bit behind. So we went through it very thoroughly, and I think there were just a couple of items that needed some adjustment. One is, I think it was the very first, I don't have that directly in front of me. Do you have it up? That's fine, I can read it. Oh, not that big, Karen.
Sorry.
Not the Reader's Digest. Okay, that works. It is our first bullet point, and the discussion was that the language that was presently in the Code of Ethics did not follow exactly with other language in our policy. So I'm going to read the updated proposed language. It says, I will make decisions in terms of the educational welfare of children and will seek to develop and maintain schools that meet the individual needs of all children regardless of their sex, race, color, national origin, religion, height, weight, marital status, handicap, disability, sexual orientation, sexual identity, or transgender status. Does that comport with what we had discussed last week? Mrs. Burton?
I'm not sure if this is just a typo. For those who may not be aware, what we're doing is making sure that this is, Mrs. Opus, correct me if I'm wrong, this is aligned with the same verbiage that we have with our employees, and that is from the state of Michigan. Is that correct?
It's national.
It's national, okay, okay. It looks like age has been removed. There are a few things that have been removed, but they've been just put in a different order, which is obviously to keep it consistent. But it looks like age has been removed, and I don't see it in the list in another place. Should that have been removed, or is that supposed to be just in a different place in the sentence?
Age is not in the policy that is on our website. Let me just quickly review that, and it could be missing from that. But if it were to match specifically what is on. Oh, I'm sorry. It does match what is currently on our website, but I see that does not have age either. So let me take a quick look.
And this is going for a first reading and a second reading before it's approved anyway, so we
Yes.
certainly have time to check
I believe age should
into
be
it.
included in there.
I think that it should also. And
Yes.
it looks like, I suspect it was taken out to put it in a different order, just to keep it consistent, but it looks like it may not have been put back in.
Yes.
Okay,
We will add that back in.
okay.
Thank you, Mrs. Burton. Other questions or comments? We're good on that then? Thank you for including that new language. All right, now I've got it up here. And we had one other area, and this related to, let's see, is that the second page? Okay, it's the 6th bullet point on page 2. Am I right on that? Okay, and Mrs. Jarvis has provided us with some proposed language, and I will let Mrs. Jarvis go ahead and read that and just indicate which is the new language.
Thank you, President Johnson. On the 6th item on the second page, it's simply an addition of one sentence, but I'll read the entire item. It says, "I will stay informed about current educational issues by individual study and through participation in programs providing needed information. For example, those sponsored by my state and national school board associations. I will share what I have learned with my colleagues, formally or informally, so as to keep our board apprised of current issues and topics."
Thank you, Mrs. Jarvis. Questions, comments? Mrs. Burton?
Just one suggestion, because colleagues can apply to LPS colleagues, they can also apply to our statewide fellow school board colleagues in other districts. Our intention, I believe, is for us to share this with our LPS colleagues, so I would just suggest that we add LPS before the word colleagues, so that it would read, "I will share what I've learned with my LPS colleagues, formally or informally."
Mrs. Bradford?
I do like colleagues, because that does apply to both our board members and primarily our board members, but sometimes we're coming back from conferences, sharing that information with our superintendent or our cabinet members also. So I do like the word colleagues in there.
Well,
Thank
I
you,
would,
Mrs.
oh, sorry.
Mrs.
Thank-
Bradford.
Thank you, President Johnson. I was going to say, would we put with my board colleagues, or do you think it should be LPS colleagues, more broadened?
I would like LPS colleagues, because we do share that information at times with our superintendent and cabinet.
Okay.
I agree.
More frequently it's board, but it still does apply.
Mrs. Bonnefield?
My only question would be, do we, just for consistency purposes, do we say Livonia Public Schools, or can we shorten it with LPS and be okay with that?
I'm fine with Livonia Public Schools.
Okay.
Okay, Any other comments? I think that's helpful, is that we add that on there. So if we can make that adjustment, then we'll bring it on for a first reading next week at our regular meeting. All right. Thank you all.
Mr. Johnson?
Mrs. Burton?
We also have, under board president, there's just a very tiny change. Second bullet,
Oh, I see it. Thank you.
go ahead.
And that will read, I will advise persons addressing the board to do so in a respectful manner and not allow rude or indecent behavior, profane or indecent discourse to be directed to the board, superintendent, or others during board meetings. And the addition, change there was, we had rude and indecent behavior, and we changed it to or indecent behavior. We all good with that?
Yep.
Sounds good. Mrs. Burton?
And just for the benefit of the public, that is out of state law, but we have included it in our policy also. That's not something that's just unique, that is unique to Livonia Public Schools. That is state law.
Okay. All right. I think those were the only 3 changes to our code of conduct. We all good on that then? All right. Then we'll move to item 3, our building and site, and I will turn it over to Mrs. Burton.
Thank you. First item under building and site is the purchase of administrative furniture, and we will be hearing from Mr. Francis.
We can do a little singing before he gets up here.
Oh, he's already here.
Oh, there he is.
Thank goodness.
Yes, you didn't have to hear my singing.
Good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
Welcome back. We have purchase of administrator furniture. We discussed this little light detail at the study session last week. This is a planned bond item out of the 2021 bond fund. When we say administrator furniture, just to specify, we're talking about principals, assistant principals, coordinators, folks who are administrators, leaders in the, officially leaders in the district across the buildings. We recently completed the teaching staff furniture across the district, which was an amazing process to actually work through. I really enjoyed doing that, enjoyed the logistical challenge of it, and frankly, Interior Environments really handled those logistical nightmares, if you will, and we had a really successful teaching staff furniture program through the bond, and we've gotten some nice positive feedback about that from some of the folks who received those. So the next step in that plan is now to do the administrators in those buildings. So that's sort of the background of what we've got here. Interior Environments and their designer and I walked all the buildings, all the offices, talked with those administrators. Basically, we have, and it was in your board pack, you saw some renderings and some pictures of different items. We've got the desks, we've got the task chair, we've got bookshelves, file cabinets, really those base items. And then depending on need, use, space, etc., there's other items that will be going into some of the offices. It might be a round or rectangular or a different shaped table so they can have a meeting with a staff member, a parent, a student, whatever the case may be. It might be a couple of file cabinets with open shelves, depending on just all of it really was trying to work in the space that we had, because unlike a classroom, most of our classrooms are about the same size. They're fairly similar across the district and across buildings. Obviously, we have variations there, but the offices within buildings are, even in the same building, you have 2 offices next to each other, which are just shaped differently, sized differently, et cetera. So we wanted to accommodate the space. We wanted to accommodate the type of work. Is it a need for a meeting space? Do you have a conference room next door that you could always do that? So maybe we have something else in this space. So we really went through all those paces. We are still in process. We've got Interior Environments, the designer there is currently now working on doing renderings of each specific office, placing the furniture that we discussed in that space. And then we do what's called a validation, which each individual administrator. So we're gonna meet again with every one of the principals and assistant principals, et cetera, probably virtually, because it's easier just to simply pop it up on the screen, walk through it, say, is this what you understood it to be? Does this make sense in that space? So we validate those before then we still have a chance to make any needed changes. And then we'll have our final list, and we will then make that order. Fortunately, furniture of this type is not really on super long lead times. We can get them in a reasonable amount of time. However, because, and it's unbelievable, it's already mid-March, that we wanted to bring this to the board with a not-to-exceed number, simply because we could come up with that number, but we don't have all those validations done yet. We wanted to buy ourselves those extra 4 or 5 weeks, because the meeting for April is at the very end. I actually think that it's actually May 1st, so it's the very beginning of May. So it really, those 5 weeks are important for us. We're gonna aim to put these in July. That way, the folks can leave their offices for the summer knowing that I need to clean this area up, I need to clean it out, I can, get everything organized, and then we can have the movers come in, swap out, do the installation, and then when administrators come back, it's all done, right? So that is our plan, and as I mentioned in my memo to you, Interior Environments came up with a not to exceed of $459,228.15. I might round that up for the board meeting and the resolution, just so it's easier to say. But it's essentially, and you saw in the documentation that accompanied it, they basically took a general principal's office, ran it across, and said it would be this much if we did that times X number of principals, if we did an assistant principal office, ran that times X number, and whatnot. So that's how we came up with that. They believe that there's plenty of contingency built right into that. So that will be the number we bring. We do not believe we will end up using that amount, but we certainly don't want to be under what we have the board approves, because as we all know, we can't spend a penny more than what the board approves, but we can always return that contingency money back to the bond. So having said that, and again, you saw some of the photos or some of the renderings of them. We've got a few color choices in there for each building, so make sure it matches. We went into a couple spots, even those 3 didn't quite match, but you can just find a different laminate in the same price category, and make sure that everything is up to date, workable. They're gonna be height adjustable desks for the administrators, meaning it can be a sit-stand type desk. So really kind of modernizing what we have. Going from every building and every office across the district, it is quite literally a mishmash of furniture in those administrative offices. In most instances, in the last bond, the 2013 bond, in the vast majority of cases, we weren't doing those types of things in principals and assistant principals' offices. We may have recarpeted it and put some blinds on the window or roller shades on the window, but it was the same old furniture that got moved right back into those spaces. So this is something that, bar none, everybody was excited when we came out and met with them and went through it. And we're all pretty excited about it, because it's just that opportunity to give our professionals some professional items to work with.
Okay, Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, Mrs. Burton. And just to make sure that I understand, we have a quote in our information. That quote was just to give us an idea and give us a not-to-exceed number.
Correct.
Is that what you're saying?
Correct, because
Okay.
she simplified it by taking, I'll take an example of, I said the principals. She took a principal's office, totaled those items out, and then multiplied that number by X number of principals. Well, not every principal's office is gonna have all the same items, but she did it in such a way to say, whether a bookshelf is there or a file cabinet is there, will be covered by the number that she's bringing up. So she had to have some way of getting to that point to say, well, I'm not just pulling a number out of thin air. I did the math on it, and I did it a little on the top end to make sure that we have enough approval dollars from the Board of Education to be able to actually come through and purchase all of these items. And it really wouldn't be a terrible surprise that if we do a validation, we find something that says, oh, you know what, I don't need that, I need this. I realize I need more files and not a bookshelf with open shelves, things like that. We should be completely fine the way that she did that math. So it's a real number. The price of each item we have, the price of the labor, the freight, the install we have, it's just a matter of, there's not really a bookshelf in every single room. They might be swapped around. And we also have several offices that have, well, we have two at the top of my head, that did have built-in casework. So there's not gonna be a desk there. There'll be a chair, but there won't be the file cabinets, et cetera, because it's already built-in casework. So we know we actually have that as something that we can back out of that number, if I'm explaining that correctly.
And so you gave us some renderings too, some photographs. That's, again, just to give us a number. The furniture may or may not look exactly like what we see.
The desk, those are the items, those are
the
actual items.
Okay,
And those are the things that we showed the administrators when we visited them. Those are the items that are in this building, up in the coordinators' offices. That's where it came from. Our administrative coordinators that are on the second floor, that's the same type of desk that they have. We're going for that same model. It's just a matter of a change of the laminate based upon the colors of individual offices. And the other items then would coordinate with those finishes. But those are the actual items.
okay, thanks.
And just to clarify, as Mr. Francis said, the individual cost of the items will not fluctuate. So we know that that's been standardized. It will really be the amount of the total number of each of those items. So the desk layout, the bookshelf, the closed file cabinet, the chairs, those won't vary, and that pricing will remain stable. It would just be if every single office included each one of these items, which they will not.
This is what it
And
would
so the
be.
number
Okay.
will only be lower than what we have here, but we have it as a to not exceed, because we really wanted to balance that out with waiting until May 1st to get approval versus now. And they weren't able to draw all of those and get them checked with each individual principal by this board meeting. And so it's been priced out that way, but the pricing is stable. It's just how many of each item we will need.
Gotcha.
And if you look at the quote, you can see that it's broken out between the furniture itself, the freight, and the installation. So and fortunately, because we're gonna do it in July, we don't need to do it on weekends or nights because school will be out. So we're able to just come in on a given week and just work during the day.
Mrs. Bradford.
Thank you, Mrs. Burton. So Phil, will each administrator be able to pick, I see there's various colors and different colors for the furniture. Is that the administrators picking that, or is that interiors coming in and choosing what looks good in the room?
Right, no, good question. Actually, the decisions were made actually on site when we were in the office. So we would look, and for the most part, the building didn't have to be exactly the same, because as you know, in our high schools, there's an office way over there in that part of the little city, which is a high school, and then there's another one over here. So what we really tried to do was to work with the administrator to have it not only match their space, but in a lot of instances, we have glass windows or open doors separating to the main part of the office, and we wanted to tie in to what was the secretaries were also sitting at. So we made sure we tried to have the colors match. So the designer also went with me. So she was the one, that I'd like to give my opinion, but nobody really cared what it was. But they definitely, we had that different information and said, wow, if you can see those items in this carpet, in this colored paint, then I would recommend like one of these two. Which one do you like better? Because they both go. They're both tasteful. And then the person say, oh, I think I like that. Or they say, I'll trust you, whatever you say should go here. So we really did it in a thoughtful way to make sure that it wasn't just a randomized item.
And one follow-up. Last week at the study session, we talked about if there was a particular item that an administrator liked in their office, that they had like a chair or something that is their favorite, would they be able to keep that, or how would that look like?
Yeah. So for the vast majority of items that are in the offices, they're pretty dated,
They're so old.
right? So for the most part, people said, yeah, I mean,
We're willing.
I'm good.
Ready.
I did have a conversation with one or two folks that had like a personalized chair for them, and I said, you're still gonna get a chair, we just need to store it, because if you're not here, that's your personal chair you're gonna take, the next person needs to have it. And we're buying it now, we can have them all be the same, we're getting the buying power of the amount that we're, purchasing. This is a side note, through contract pricing, and i.e. with all the work that we've done with the furniture, has also discounted that even further, like they did with the teaching staff furniture. So essentially, everybody is getting the updated items. Now, people have personal items in there, that's totally fine.
Okay.
But for the large pieces that were shown, like desks, like bookshelves, like file cabinets, those types of things, we're going to be replacing all of those. If someone has their favorite chair, they can put the one that they have aside and they can use theirs, but it really only sounded like one, maybe two people were even gonna do that. Because a lot of them, I walked into offices, and I'm not exaggerating,
They're
with
ready for it.
cuts and holes and things like that in the chairs. Our folks have been basically using hand-me-downs. I did find a certain superintendent's former years ago furniture in one of the principal's offices that's been handed down from person to person for quite some time. So, most of it just needs to be replaced.
Perfect, thank you.
Any other questions or comments?
Like to have this on the regular?
Yes, and Mr. Francis, what will happen with the old furniture? Do we auction that?
For the most part, a lot of it will we actually, just like with the teacher furniture, are gonna have Rose movers and i.e. handle the removal of it.
Okay.
So we'll come up with a solution probably similar to what we did with teachers, where if something needed to go, it'll get tagged and be gone. If it has value, and there are items in there that still have value, then that will be not tagged with the go, but the keep, and then the building can take care of that. And I do know that a couple of them told me, especially at the larger buildings, said, we absolutely know where we want to put some of this stuff.
Okay.
And so we'll do that kind of judiciously.
Okay, sounds good. Any other questions or comments? No? All right, and this is on the agenda for the next meeting?
Please.
Okay. All righty. Next item on our agenda is French Associate Amendment. And Mr. Francis?
I've invited
Mrs.
our CFO, Mrs. Smith, to join me. We talked about this a little bit at the study session, and hello.
Hello.
We did have a fairly good discussion, I think, at the study session on this, and I think that the letter from Plant Moran Cressa that Mr. Weber wrote was also well put together, concise, but explained it well. I'm going to give you, since I did it last time, I'm going to give you a crack at it, so I'm sure you'll do it better than I did last week even, so.
Thank you. So as you know, French is doing a lot of the design work for us for the 2021 bond. In their original agreement, it included two parts, their fees for service, and then it also included a component for reimbursables. So those would be the things that they're paying for on behalf of the district that aren't charges for their services. Those could be, primarily it's permits and whatnot. So as we're going along, they've been paying more of the permits out of their own pocket and then submitting them to us for reimbursement. So before we exceed that allocation that we've initially approved them for, we thought it best to bring back an amendment and make sure that the board is on board with that plan. And that's what this amendment would do, would allow them an additional $75,000 of reimbursable expenses to flow through them and then be submitted to us for reimbursement.
For clarification, and Mrs. Smith mentioned it, the amount that we're going to ask for this to be on the voting meeting, and it would be $75,000. Also to clarify, it is literally a pass-through. I know that in life, most of the time, if you have a convenience item that occurred, that company would add a fee to that. That is not what's happening here. If it was a $100 permit, if it was a $2,000 permit, whatever French is paying it, we're simply paying them back for the amount that we were actually being charged. They do it because it speeds up the process. They're working directly with these entities, whether it be a county or a city, or the state. They pay whatever the permit fee, or as an example, is, and then we're simply giving that money back to French. It's not a percentage on it. There's not an extra fee on it. There's not a convenience fee on it. It's literally a pass-through.
Mrs. Bonnefield?
Thank you, Mrs. Burton. Is this additional permits that we didn't originally have in the budget, or is this permits that we had in the budget that we had budgeted that we're gonna pay for and now French is gonna pay for it? So we're adjusting to shifting budgets, or
That
we're
is
adding to
correct.
the?
We would be shifting budgets, so these are part of the overall construction project costs.
So we
that
had already
budgeted for, yep,
planned for these, it's just simply who's paying for them?
exactly. Yep.
Perfect.
President Johnson?
Thank you, Mrs. Burton. Two questions. Number one, do we foresee in the future a need for additional reimbursables?
We asked them not to come back to us, so we said, you know, obviously calculate it out over the next number of years, how many projects we have remaining. We're gonna go back one more time, so we don't anticipate needing to come back to the board for more reimbursables
Okay.
later.
And I'm assuming that the process that we're going through now on the reimbursable is going to stay the same. In other words, they pay it and they will just submit to us
Yep,
the cost and we reimburse them.
exactly.
It
And
really cuts down
yeah.
on confusion and it cuts down on time.
Okay, thank you.
Any other comments or questions? Seeing none, Mrs. Bonnefield, can you put that on the next week's agenda? Thank you very much. And that concludes Building and Site.
Thank you, Mrs. Burton. That'll take us to item 4, our curriculum committee, and I will turn it over to Mrs. Acosta.
Thank you, President Johnson. We have one item under 4A, which is cooperative agreements for LCTC and the Livonia Transition Program. We have Mr. Itu and Dr. Terrio with us.
Good evening, thank you very much. So Kevin and I are very excited to talk about two programs that both of us are very excited about. I'm going to start with the Livonia Transition Program. So you know it is my honor every year to talk about the cooperative agreements that we have for this program. So just a brief reminder that the Livonia Transition Program is an 18 to 26-year-old program for students who are on a certificate of completion. It is primarily housed at Schoolcraft College, and we have a variety of other sites. We actually have 20 other sites throughout Livonia and Wayne Westland area that we are extremely proud of. We have students from Crestwood for next year, 2 students, Garden City, 3 students, Huron, 1 student, anticipating 40 Livonia students, 10 students from Northville, 7 from Redford Union, 3 from South Redford, and 4 from Van Buren. So we received the state aid for the student plus an additional $8,000 on top of the state aid for our programming. And to date, we have 56 students who have been competitively employed, 7 so far this year. So we're very excited to continue this program with our surrounding districts.
And then for the Livonia Career Technical Center, as you know, it services juniors and seniors in high schools on a specific career pathway with multiple programs over at the Career Center. We do a cooperative agreement with 6 different school districts, including Northville, Plymouth Canton, Redford, Plymouth Christian Academy, and so on. Approximately 39 students are currently enrolled from out of district at the Livonia Career Technical Center, but when we do our scheduling, first come, first serve in terms of our Livonia Public School students. And then we service those that are out of district that need to use one of those programs from there. So we're looking to continue that excitement as we move forward for the next school year.
Excellent.
Thank you. President Johnson?
Thank you, Mrs. Acosta. I looked over the agreements. I didn't have the old ones to compare them with, but I'm assuming, nothing jumped out at me to say that there was any big changes. I assume they're pretty standard from what we had.
Yeah, it's a standard
Okay,
cooperative
correct.
agreement for each of the school districts.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Mrs. Acosta.
Mrs. Burton?
For those who may not be aware, Dr. Terrio, you began this program with Livonia Public Schools, but this is one that's your baby.
It is.
I've been on the board, I mean, this came to pass during the last 12 years, so it was, I think it was, what, 8 to 10 years ago that it began, somewhere around there?
2011.
Okay. It is very, very exciting, and this is one of those things that you just kind of assume that other districts all do this, but by virtue of the fact that we have districts sending their kids here, they don't all do this. And not even Livonia Public Schools had this offering until 2011. But kudos to you and the entire team that has not only put this together, but grown this program to the degree that it has, that we have this number of students and this number of businesses. It is so exciting when you go around our community and you see some of our students at work, and they're thrilled. It's generally a fabulous experience. So on behalf of the businesses and the students and their families, thank you to you and your team for putting this program together, because it wasn't easy. It's still not easy, I'm quite certain. And it takes a lot of work and a lot of effort by a lot of really dedicated people. You may not have the list. You said there are 10 businesses.
We have 20.
20.
I'm more than happy to name them.
I
for
was going to
you
say, if you
would like
could
to hear them.
either now or next week, whatever's most convenient, because
That is
those
up to you.
businesses deserve to be recognized also.
Absolutely.
And so that when we are out and about in our community, those in the room today, and those who may be listening to this meeting, give a thank you to those businesses, because they are reaching out and they're helping to serve our students and helping them to grow into productive adult members of our society, and it's a great thing. They deserve to be known.
Absolutely, I'd be more than happy to. And I also just need to thank Para Baker, who was one of our first teachers in the program, who really initiated going out into local communities and getting a lot of these jobs for us. Beth Santer, who is now the Executive Director of Student Services in Northville, also did a tremendous job, and now Megan Sproul continues to work with our post-secondary students as the principal at Garfield, and continues to support the Livonia Transition Program and all of our amazing teachers and paraprofessionals in that program. Cantoro Italian Market, Embassy Suites, St. Mary Mercy Hospital, Ward Church, Cedar Brook Assisted Living, Goodwill Industries, Granite City, Hampton Inn, Meyer, Adat Shalom Memorial Park, Bigby Coffee, Livonia Public Schools, so we have Buchanan and Coolidge, Frost, GSRP at Garfield. We also have Country Inn Hotel, Livonia Civic Center Library, Mod Pizza, Oakmont Senior Living, and then Schoolcraft College. So we thank all of our community partners with the Livonia Transition Program. Again, thank you to all of them, and for those who have hired our students, who are absolutely amazing employees. So thank you.
Absolutely.
And we'd like to, if there's no other questions, have this at the.
I think Ms. Bonnefield.
Yeah, my comment really followed Mrs. Burton, was that I think, we know that there's a state requirement that we have students that we are required to educate and keep with us until they're 26 years old. And I think, it's been a while, so we sort of keep this, take this for granted. But I just, goes back to what Mrs. Burton said, was this is an amazing program. It's very special. And I believe, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, that it goes way, way above and beyond what we're required to do for these students. And so I just, again, I think it's a fantastic program, and thank you very much for what you do. And just, I think, just make sure that when we're talking about this in public, that this is a lot more than, we're required to do, and we've gone. And I guess I don't mean to say it like that, like we're patting ourselves on the back and stuff, but I just, a lot of work has been put into this with a lot of great outcome for our students. And it's just, it really is a point of pride, and just kind of highlights that, we really care about our kids.
Absolutely, we care about all of our kids, so this is that program that really epitomizes that belief here in Livonia Public Schools. So I really appreciate you guys recognizing this program every year and allowing us to continue to support students across Western Wayne County.
Absolutely.
Thank you again for all you do, and that concludes our.
One
Oh,
other,
I'm sorry. Go
one
ahead,
other quick
Christine.
thing. Along the lines of the Career Tech Center, similarly, this is a program that I know when I joined the board, I just assumed that most communities had a Career Technical Center, and we don't. And we've had it for so long that we kind of just take it for granted, or we can fall into that pretty easily. So thank you to our secondary department and those who have devoted their careers to the Career Technical Center. Many folks who came before all of us. But this program continues to grow, and we continue to tweak what we're offering there. make sure that it's current, make sure that the jobs we're offering are current and in demand, opening up more spots for those that we need to, and perhaps taking away some that aren't as necessary any longer. But it is a wonderful service that we have for our general ed our population. But it's very, very important, and again, it's a jewel of Livonia Public Schools that at least at the beginning of my years as a board member, I thought everybody else had one, and they don't, again,
No.
because they're sending their kids to us.
That's right. It's definitely one of the highlights of Livonia Public Schools, to the tune of over 800 of our students attended every year. And that's just with our juniors and seniors in terms of a career pathway that they're on. And they have a dedicated staff that dives into the different programs that are available to them, that allows those students to get credentialed, they call it, in terms of testing out, in terms of those programs and getting jobs once they graduate from high school. So it's definitely a jewel.
Yeah.
Appreciate
And
that.
many of the kids I know, for many of the kids, it's a fabulous first step into what's going to be their career. For some, it's a step or two into it to realize, you know what, this isn't maybe what I want to do for my whole life. But how valuable is that, to find that out when they're juniors and seniors in high school, rather than when they're 3/4 of the way through their college experience and realize, oops, I'd like to make a different choice. So again, it's just a wonderful program.
Absolutely.
Any other comments? Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
That concludes curriculum report.
Thank you. Thank you, Mrs. Acosta. That'll take us to our Finance Committee. Mrs. Bonnefield.
Thank you, President Johnson. We are on Finance Committee on 5A. We have just one item, and everybody has one. We're gonna talk with Mrs. Smith about our financial update.
Thank you. This will largely be a repeat from what you heard at the study session last week, but have one item that we wanted to go over, a change from last week, and get your feedback on that. So, as you know, we in the business office always are keeping a tight eye on our budget and comparing that to where we actually are. And the purpose of this is to make the board aware if there's any variations from where we thought we'd be to where we actually are. So we bring those quarterly in June, and in December they generally take the form of a formal budget amendment where we go line by line through our budget with the board and describe any changes that we have. And then on the off periods in October, we invite our auditors and we go over the results of the past school year and how those compared to what we had budgeted, and also again provide any updates on the current school year, such as where the student enrollment has come in and maybe what the foundation allowance is for the school year. And then in March, it's another opportunity to update you on where we are compared to where we thought we would be. So that's a little background on what we're doing here tonight. So just a reminder, we did start the school year off with $33.7 million in savings to start the year. We had anticipated revenue of $163 million, and I'm happy to report that we do have more revenue coming in that we project as of this month. So interest rates are up. You might see that on your personal savings account, and thankfully we're seeing that on the district savings account as well. So interest on our savings is up $500,000 more than what we anticipated. So that's great news, and that'll be something that we can bring forward in our final budget amendment in June. On the expenditure side, we have some more good news as far as additional grants coming our way. So as you know, we keep our grants in a separate fund, our funded projects fund. And so we're anticipating one grant, or not anticipating, we've actually received a grant. It's a per pupil payment for mental health supports for our students, and that's $1.5 million. And what we can do is, as you know, we already are investing quite a bit in the mental health of our students in the form of providers such as psychologists, social workers. We spend a lot more than $1.5 million out of our general fund on those supports, so we're able to shift some of our expenditures from the general fund over to this new grant. We're also putting some new things in place, which Dr. Terrell has worked with our team to put in place, such as a clinic over at Franklin. And we're always, again, looking for other things that we can add to the mix for our students. But what that'll end up doing is lowering our expenditures for this year, so we'll be able to shift some of those costs over to the grant. We have another grant that we're anticipating that will come through that's aimed at learning loss And again, we are spending quite bit in our general fund to address learning loss. So we've again identified some general fund costs that we can shift over to our funded projects fund, which will help save some of our dollars in the general fund. So those are two great pieces of news. One other update for you is a result of our open enrollment, which takes place in the fall and then is effective January 1st. We had a few more employees hop onto our insurance than had been previously enrolled. Off the top of my head, I want to say maybe 37, and of those, maybe 25 were ones that are hopping onto our family insurance that we provide. So that will work out to about additional $300,000 for the district for costs from January through June. So I will bring that forward in the budget amendment for your review and approval in June. And then the last item we wanted to address and talk about with the board, which we talked about last week in the study session, was a need to do some one-time purchases for our athletic program. I shared an example of the wrestling mats over at Franklin were original to the program. And those are things that are definitely in need of replacement, and we think that this would be the best time to do it because we can take advantage of some of these shifts of costs over to grants, that this would be a great time to take care of some of these one-time costs. Ms. Oquist and Mr. Etu and I sat down with all three of our athletic directors and got a list from them of what are some of the things that you're seeing that would be, I'll say, needs, wants, what's on your list. So we got a lot of information. We're starting to get some costs around that. I know one of the things, too, that we learned of was that we were borrowing a pole vault from a neighboring district, and pole vault pit, thank you. And that was one of those things that, okay, we are in a financial position, we can return that and get our own pole vault pit. So we would like to move forward with that if that's agreeable to the board. And we'll bring formal amendments in June for that. And then, of course, any large purchases we would bring to the board before we go ahead with those purchases. I know one of the ones that would definitely need to come to the board before we proceeded would be the weight rooms. A lot of the equipment in the weight rooms is very outdated. We were able to do some upgrades in our fitness centers through a PEP grant within the last 10 years. The weight rooms, though, have not been touched in a long time. And so, yes, we've got, thankfully our ADs have had the opportunity to go to some other districts and get some ideas of, what works. They know exactly what we need. So right now we're working on getting some quotes and list of equipments that could go into those rooms. But these are just a few of the projects that we were talking about. So we wanted to run by the board and see what your comfort level would be to maybe earmark up to $500,000 on one-time athletic program purchases. So I will pause there. I see Ms. Oquist may have some information to add.
No, I appreciate that, and we did have an opportunity to meet and to look into this with our experts, with our athletic directors and Mr. Etu, and both Ms. Smith and I felt like this was an appropriate time as we take a look at some of these dollars potentially being one-time dollars that have come into the state that we're able to shift general fund costs to. We feel like this would be an appropriate time then to deal with some of our one-time expenditure needs. And we believe we can begin to take a chunk out of that this spring and be able to get that started now so that for fall athletics we can get some of these things in place. And then, of course, over the course of the next year. And our schools over the past 10 years or so have been extremely judicious. And when we met with them, we realized to what extent they have really continued to make do with things that we believe need to be replaced or updated. So we appreciated the time we had to spend on that. We will continue to meet and to gather information and look for the best costs on each of these individual items. But we felt like this was an appropriate time to just pause, make sure this is something that you were in support of, and then we'll continue to move forward. If we feel like we have additional expenses beyond that that would extend into next year, then we'll certainly bring that as part of our budget proposal in June.
Mrs. Bradford.
Thank you, Mrs. Bonnefield. I would definitely be in favor of seeing some of the athletic equipment be replaced. you know, in the past few years with the bond, we did all the facilities, and we built the new
Field house?
theaters. What am I can't even. Thank you. I'm having tongue-tied tonight. But we built those centers, and we upgraded those, and I do think we have so many different athletic teams and different things going on out there with our athletics. I think it's important to take a look at all that equipment. And when you hear about wrestling mats that were original wrestling mats that they're still using, we've seen, obviously, they held up for many, many years. So I think that's a wonderful time for us if we are able to shift some of the funds to be able to open that up and get some new equipment for that.
Mrs. Acosta?
As my husband's wife, I would not be his wife if I didn't give kudos or get excited about weight room equipment. But I know that a lot of the teams make use of that space. And I always worry about if it's not up-to-date equipment, about the safety of it. So it's something else to consider.
Yep, that's a great point.
Mrs. Frank?
Two things. One is I'm not sure Franklin wants new wrestling mats because they have a phenomenal wrestling team.
It has some good juju in it.
We had several kids one state, and so they're doing fantastically with those very old mats. But congratulations to the Franklin wrestling team. They did a great job, so it's interesting that you bring that up. But the other thing I wanted to say is you talked about fitness centers and weight rooms. And I think maybe for some of the community, why do we need both? I don't know if that's a Mr. E2 question or if you can answer that.
Sure,
Why we
no,
need both and what the funds are for
Yep.
differently.
And we talked about that in our time with the athletic directors and actually learned that the teams don't often use those fitness centers. So we have fitness centers that would be used by the PE classes. They would include cardio, you know, ellipticals, treadmills, some of the more, I'm trying to think what those weight machines are called. But, you know, different types of weight machines. So those are definitely used by our PE classes. And then the weight rooms are what's used by the athletic teams. And so you've got more free weights in there. You wouldn't see the same cardio equipment, but definitely different purposes for it. We did have, that was in a grant we applied for, I want to say it was around the 2014 window. We got a national grant through the Department of Education for physical education for our fitness centers. So we were able to replace largely, you know, most of the fitness center equipment. We'll probably be soon talking about those again because it's hard to believe that was already 10 years ago. But we do have an annual budget for maintenance on that equipment, so that's been maintained somewhat. But we haven't had much of an investment, if at any, in our weight room. So that would be what we're looking to do now.
So weight rooms are for student athletes and the fitness centers are more for gym classes and that type of thing.
Yeah,
PE,
exactly.
health, PFIT, all of those.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Mrs. Barton?
I'm comfortable with going forward with this largely because the beginning of this conversation on expenditures was talking about the mental health grant. And that's obviously intended to boost our mental health services that we give our students. We've done exactly that over the last 1 to 2 years. I forget the exact numbers, but we've in cases either 1.5 times or doubled the number of mental health care professionals of various titles in our different buildings. So with this grant being intended to do that, that's work that we are already doing. That's brand new work that we are, or I shouldn't say it's new work, but we are, over the last 1 to 2 years, we have really beefed up the number of people that we've put into those positions. So I don't know if either one of you wanted to address that or just leave it at that, but that is important to me. When I look at this mental health care grant, it's not like we're choosing to do something else with it. We, as a district, made that decision over the last couple of years, saying, especially coming out of COVID, we need that mental health care, and we committed to it before we even got this grant.
Yeah, we actually started that in 2017 after we received the support of the community for the Wayne County Enhancement Millage. And so we really began that investment at that time. We've continued to grow that, and we have really been able to enhance it both through our ESSERS funds as well as these grant funds, especially last year and this year. And so whether that includes rounding up our counseling staff to be able to have full-time counselors rather than portions of that based on enrollment guidelines, additional psychologists, social workers. As you might remember, at the middle school, we used to have a .25 SAP, and now we have a full-time student assistance provider at every middle school and every high school. Those used to be part-time positions, full-time psychologists and social workers at all of our middle schools and high schools, in addition to additional support at the K4 and 5-6. And so, again, some of that investment started with the Wayne County Enhancement Millage, and we've been able to expand and grow that thanks to the additional funding from the state and the federal government.
Thank you.
Mr. Johnson?
Thank you, Mrs. Bonnefield. As a pole vaulter at Bentley a few years ago, we used to use bags of foam rubber
Oh, wow.
that we had to put out every day. And if you missed one of those, well, let's just say you could bruise yourself. So I'm all in favor of updating our athletic equipment.
I think the good thing about some of the equipment purchases we're talking about are, these are purchases that will last 10, 15, 20 years. These aren't purchases that need to be made annually or even every few years. So we're really looking at making an investment now while we can, and continuing to, as you said, Mrs. Bradford, we've spent a lot of time and bond money on the facilities themselves, and now we really need to look at the equipment contained within.
Anybody else? So I would like to just say, we talk about the, teachers and staff. You, Mrs. Smith, come to us with successful grant applications all the time. And I, for one, am excited to see that we're able to not only enhance our students with the grant money, but also that shifting of the dollars allows us to be able to take care of some of these things that really have been a long time coming. And it also just really highlights, again, how judicious our staff is, how caring they are, that nobody takes any of this stuff for granted. And, we really keep track of everything and make sure it's well kept. And again, these new purchases will most likely live way beyond their expected life. So, is there anything else, Mrs. Burton?
Just one other comment that we discussed at the study session, but if you weren't in attendance at that meeting, you may not have heard this. One of the expenses that we did touch on a few moments ago was healthcare insurance costs for some of our family insurance now for our parapros. And that was in an effort to attract more folks to those positions because we were lacking in them. We were having a hard time competing with other districts, and we were losing some of our employees. And I understand that has helped us to attract and retain the folks that we need to in those positions.
It has. Thank you. It's always a good reminder to share that with our public because they might not realize that. So paraprofessionals who we are still in need of, we're definitely in a better position now that work 30 hours or more are eligible for full family benefits. So a huge incentive to come work for Livonia Public Schools. In addition to getting to serve the kids, of course, something that they can take home for their families too. So, yep. And when we, during negotiations, obviously we cost out what we think different proposals will be, and we build those into the proposed budgets. But honestly, you don't know exactly who's going to take you up on certain, opportunities or not. And so this is now an adjustment to see who took advantage of that new offering. So now it's our secretaries, it's drivers, thinking of all the groups. A lot of groups, it's now if they're working 30 hours or more, we're able to offer the full family benefits.
And that is very important. So if anyone is aware of folks who are thinking about those positions or who are doing those types of jobs, but for other entities, offering family benefits is huge. And I'm thrilled that we're back in a position where we can do that again.
Yep.
Making us relevant, competitive, and I think we also forget sometimes when we spend money that it's not 100% of an outlay, right? Retention, losing employees and the constant turnover of employees is expensive. So anything that we can do to help retain our employees or, you know, enhance our programs by bringing in additional people is well worth it.
You know what I realized? I almost forgot to give the update. Again, we did this last week, but the, you know, to share with the public the news that we're hearing from Lansing as far as our budget goes for the 23-24 school year. So we do have good news on that front. We've seen the proposal from the governor, and we're waiting to see the ones from the House and the Senate, but we are hearing that they'll most likely pretty closely align with the governor's proposal. The governor is proposing an increase in the foundation allowance by $458 per pupil. So I know you know this, the school is funded based on a per pupil basis. Currently, we're getting $9,150 per pupil, and the governor's proposing increasing that by $458. When we take into consideration some of the historical student decline that we've seen, we still think that that could result in an additional $4.8 million for our general fund. So a rather significant, you know, investment in K-12 education, which we like to see. It's getting us closer to what we saw recommended in the School Research Finance Collaborative. And again, that was an outside research company that came in and researched what is the cost of educating a child. And so we're slowly starting to get there. So that's wonderful. The governor is also proposing a 5% increase in at-risk or funding for our at-risk students, so at risk of failing. So a 5% increase would be an additional $200,000 to put towards resources and supports for our at-risk students. The other pretty significant investment was in special education funding. So this was something new that we saw last year, that this past year we got 75%. So we get a foundation allowance for our students with special needs, and we also got an additional foundation allowance that was 75% of the foundation allowance for special needs students. And the governor is proposing increasing that to 87.5%. So what does that mean for us? That means for our general fund about $500,000 more of reimbursement for our special ed costs. The district spends on average about $30 million a year in special education costs. Half of that is operating our county-wide Act 18 programs, and we've got 4 of those for the moderative cognitive impairment, for visually impaired, for our artistic students, and then for our work skills, which is our 18 to 26-year-olds with a cognitive impairment. And that program is fully funded between what we receive from the state and then we're made whole by the county. And then the other half, the about $15 million, is what's paid for out of our general fund, and we submit a cost report to the state every year, and then they reimburse us about 28% of those costs. So we still have, or we had, about $10 million worth of unreimbursed special education costs. So this revenue is getting us towards reimbursement of those costs. We're still not to 100%, but again, this is a large investment from the state on getting us closer to that number. So that is a good piece of news. And then the last one was funding related to retirement costs. So we are, you know, fortunate in the public school system to still offer a very desirable pension plan, as well as a 401k type of retirement plan. But with that comes a, you know, pretty large cost. And so under the governor's proposal, she's got a few different funding sources to help us offset some of those costs that we have in the general fund. And I anticipate that to be in the ballpark of about $2 million to help us offset retirement costs. So this is great news that we're hearing. And again, we're hearing that the House and the Senate may have some tweaks and have some different ideas of things they'd like to see funded, but we anticipate seeing something largely close to what we've seen from the governor. So good news for that. I know we'll have more information, of course, before we bring that back to the board. We'll have another revenue estimating conference that the state does in May, so we'll see how the revenues are coming in to make sure that what the governor is proposing will be possible.
Mrs. Burton.
Mrs. Smith, frequently when we see increases, especially when it's to the per pupil increases, we also see categoricals then that quietly eat away at some of those increases. Do we know of any of those yet? And I recognize we don't have a final plan yet,
but sometimes it looks like a huge increase, but if there's a deduction on another line item, the net is not as rosy as it had initially looked.
Yes.
What do we know along that line, or do we
We-
not hear anything yet?
Yeah, we haven't heard of deductions in anything, and largely the different categoricals that we're receiving this year are included in the governor's budget. So one of the big ones that was the first time this year was the per pupil funding for security costs, and that is in the budget for next year. And in fact, the way that the budget was proposed, they're actually putting in funding for the next 2 years, similar to what we've gotten this year. And again, for us, that was $1.5 million. That's what we used to purchase the security cameras that we brought to the board a month or two ago. So we're looking at probably another $1.5 million for security costs. And of course, we've got more, things that we'd like to do, so we can put that to good use. So largely, the categoricals that we saw this year, we anticipate will continue on for next year.
Okay, and they're positive, not negative.
Yes, yes, yep,
We've seen them all go in every direction.
yep.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions for Mrs. Smith? Okay, thank you
Thank you.
very much. Oh, President Johnson, that completes finance.
Thank you, Mrs. Bonnefield. We'll move to item 6, our policy committee, and Mrs. Frank.
Good evening. Mr. Etu is going to review our policy updates with us. Thank
Good evening
you.
again, everyone. We are bringing forth policy IHFB. It's in regards to instructional programs, high school graduation exercises. The last time this one was revisited was in June of 1988. So we're looking to make a few edits to this board policy. One of the ones is changing the word exercises to ceremonies. And then as it reads in the first paragraph, we're going to change it to the school district shall plan appropriate graduation ceremonies. And then as we move through that paragraph, for those students who have successfully completed their program of study in accordance with requirements established by the State of Michigan and Board of Education. Second paragraph, we kind of overhaul a little bit, clean up some language. We removed that first paragraph or that first sentence, and we're looking to add students may participate in graduation ceremonies if they have accrued the number of credits required to graduate, which may include taking up to 1.0 credits after graduation, but prior to August 31st of the same year. And now that we're starting before Labor Day, we moved up that date from the end of September to the end of August. They do not have to pass the classes in order to participate, but they must remain enrolled. We want to add that diplomas will be issued with completion of required credits, and disciplinary action may prevent participation in graduation ceremonies and/or activities. And just for some perspective, this is something that we have annually worked through at the high school levels for years with Livonia Public Schools. So we're going to make those edits.
Perfect. Thank you, Mr. Etu. Any questions, comments about the updates? Mrs. Burton?
Yes, Mr. Etu, second paragraph, the one sentence that remains unchanged, they do not have to pass the classes in order to participate, but must remain enrolled. Could we change that to they do not have to have passed the class?
We can, so the classes that they'll be taking is after graduation, but prior to August 31st. So if we say passed the class, it's past tense, whereas they'd be ongoing throughout the summer. So that's the purpose of keeping it as past the classes.
Okay. Any other comments or questions?
Just out of curiosity, do we have very many kids that have disciplinary reasons for not walking?
It has occurred. It's very, very seldom.
Okay.
Anything else? No? Thank you. And we'd like to put this on for first reading?
First reading,
For the,
if we could, please.
Perfect.
All right.
For the board meeting.
Thank you.
Mr. Etu.
Mhm.
And that concludes policy. President Johnson.
Thank you, Mrs. Frank. That'll take us to item 7, Personnel Committee. Mrs. Bradford.
Thank you, President Johnson. At this time, we do not have any personnel committee items.
Nothing.
We do
Correct.
not.
Thank you. We're all set. Thank you.
Thank you. That'll move us to item 8, our legislative committee. Mrs. Jarvis.
Thank you, President Johnson. We don't have any items on our agenda, but I would like to mention to the board that last week Senate Bill 12 passed in the House, which I will remind you is the third grade reading law, and this particular bill would simply eliminate the student retention portion of that. It doesn't change anything else in the bill. So now we are waiting for the governor to sign that. And Mrs. Oquist, do you have anything to add?
I do, thank you, and that is a very important update. That is something that, as you know from the start, we have been strongly opposed to the retention component of the law, not of the law itself. It certainly has many valuable parts, and our Senate Representative, Senator Polanki, was a key leader in making these changes to this bill and bringing that forward. So we appreciate the work of the legislature to take a look at the impact of retention on students. It certainly has no research behind it to make an impact on their progress. However, other portions of the bill certainly are still valuable and are in place. A couple of quick updates. Last Friday, I had the opportunity, along with my other superintendent colleagues in Wayne County, to spend about just under 2 hours with our local senators and state representatives from really across the region. We covered 8 or 9 pretty significant topics in the area of education, one being the budget, and then a number of other items that will be coming before the legislature over the next few months. So it was a really good opportunity to have very open dialogue about a number of the bills that are pending, to speak to the School Finance Research Collaborative and the importance of taking a look at that base funding amount and doing what we can over the next 4 years to get us to that full funding, which really would only require about a $200 per year increase per pupil over the next 4 years, and we would be at that base amount. We talked about some other related costs to that, and the importance of continuing to look at what the research says about the costs of educating a child and meeting the needs of not only each individual student, but those with added needs, maybe our English language learners, our special education students, the need for having strong CTE programs as we do, but knowing that those programs often cost additional dollars. So we had a great dialogue about those pieces and many other items. And then this Friday locally, we will be hosting our local senators and representatives here in Livonia Public Schools. And we will, a few of us will be spending time, again, talking about specifically some of the points of pride of LPS, some of the things we've been able to do with the funding that has been provided over the past couple of years, and then also some of the needs and things of highest priority to be able to meet the needs of our students and our schools. So we appreciate their accessibility and their willingness to be thought partners with us on some important legislation that will be coming forward.
Sorry, that brings us to the end of our agenda tonight, and I want to thank all those who tuned in and watched this evening, and tune in next week for our regular meeting. So we are at the end, so good evening and thank you.